Elena woke up to the soft glow of sunlight filtering through the curtains. It was her birthday, and though she had hoped for a day filled with love and excitement, a lingering sense of emptiness tugged at her. She glanced at the empty space beside her in bed. Mark had already left for work. She sighed, wondering if he even remembered. The past few months had been a blur of routine, their conversations reduced to mundane exchanges about bills and chores. She missed the spark they once had, the way he used to look at her like she was the only person in the room. By midday, her doubts were dispelled when Mark returned home early, carrying a beautifully wrapped gift. His smile was warm, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes. Nervousness, perhaps. He handed her the box, and inside was a delicate necklace with a pendant shaped like a crescent moon. "Happy birthday, Elena," he said, his voice soft but earnest. "I know things haven't been perfect lately, but I want tonight to be special. I've planned something unforgettable." Elena's heart swelled with hope. Maybe this was the turning point they needed. She hugged him tightly, feeling a surge of affection she hadn't felt in a long time. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Mark kissed her forehead, but his hands felt tense against her back, as if he were holding something back. That evening, Mark took her to a luxurious restaurant she had always wanted to try. The ambience was perfect. Dim lighting, soft music, and a table by the window overlooking the city skyline. Elena felt like she was in a dream, but something about Mark's behavior kept pulling her back to reality. He was unusually quiet, his eyes darting to his phone every few minutes. When she asked if everything was okay, he brushed it off with a smile. "Just making sure everything's perfect for you," he said, but his tone lacked conviction. Halfway through dinner, Liam arrived. Elena was surprised but not displeased. Liam had always been a charming presence in their lives, Mark's closest friend and someone she considered a confidant. He greeted her with a warm hug and a kiss on the cheek. His usual easygoing self. "Happy birthday, Elena," he said, handing her a small gift. She opened it to find a bottle of her favorite perfume. "You remembered," she said, touched by the gesture. As the evening progressed, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Mark and Liam exchanged glances that seemed loaded with unspoken words, and their laughter felt forced at times. She tried to brush it off, attributing it to her own insecurities, but the tension was palpable. When Mark suggested they head back home for the real surprise, Elena agreed, though a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. The drive home was quiet, the car filled with a strange energy. Elena glanced at Mark, who kept his eyes on the road, his jaw tight. Liam sat in the back seat, humming softly to the radio, but even his usual calm demeanor seemed strained. When they arrived, the house was beautifully decorated with candles and fairy lights, the air filled with the scent of roses. Elena was impressed, but the unease lingered. Mark poured drinks for everyone, and they sat together in the living room. The silence was heavy, and Elena could feel her heart pounding in her chest. Finally, Mark took a deep breath and spoke. "Elena, there's something I need to tell you." His voice was steady, but his hands trembled as he set his glass down. "Liam and we've been seeing each other. Romantically." The words hit Elena like a punch to the gut. She stared at him, her mind struggling to process what he had just said. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Mark reached for her hand, but she pulled away, her emotions swirling between anger, betrayal, and disbelief. Liam spoke next, his voice calm but filled with remorse. "Elena, I never wanted to hurt you. What Mark and I have, it doesn't change how much he loves you. It's just different." Elena felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She looked at Mark, searching his face for answers. "How long?" she asked, her voice breaking. "A few months," Mark admitted, his eyes filled with guilt. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to lose you, but I couldn't keep lying to myself, or to you." Elena felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She stood up, pacing the room as she tried to make sense of everything. Part of her wanted to scream, to demand answers, but another part of her was oddly calm, as if she had always known something like this would happen. Mark and Liam exchanged a glance, and then Mark spoke again. Elena, we're not asking for your forgiveness. We want to be honest with you. And if you're willing, we'd like to explore this together. All three of us. Elena stopped pacing, her mind racing. She looked at Mark, then at Liam, and for the first time she saw the vulnerability in their eyes. They were scared just like she was. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. I don't know, she said finally, her voice trembling. I need time to think. Mark nodded. His expression filled with relief and gratitude. Take all the time you need, he said softly. Elena sat back down, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time she felt alive. Elena sat frozen, the weight of Mark's confession pressing down on her chest. Her mind raced, trying to reconcile the man she had married with the one sitting before her. His hands trembling as he reached for her. She pulled away, her voice barely a whisper. How could you do this to me? She asked, her eyes darting between Mark and Liam. Mark's face was pale. His usual confidence shattered. I didn't plan for this to happen, he said, his voice cracking. It just did. And I couldn't keep lying to you. Liam leaned forward, his expression earnest. Elena, I know this is a lot to process. But what Mark and I have. It's not about replacing you. It's about adding something to what already exists. Elena stared at him, her emotions a tangled mess. She had always liked Liam, his easy charm, his quick wit, but now he felt like a stranger. You've been lying to me too, she said, her voice rising. Both of you. How am I supposed to trust anything you say now? Mark reached for her hand again, and this time she didn't pull away. I know we've hurt you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And I don't expect you to forgive us. But I need you to know that I love you. That hasn't changed. Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. Then why? She asked, her voice breaking. Why him? Why now? Mark hesitated, glancing at Liam before answering. Because he makes me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years, he admitted. And I didn't want to lose that. But I also didn't want to lose you. Elena felt a pang of jealousy mixed with curiosity. She had always prided herself on being open-minded, but this was uncharted territory. What are you asking from me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark took a deep breath. We're not asking for anything, he said carefully. But if you're willing, we'd like to explore this together. All three of us. Elena's heart skipped a beat. She looked at Liam, who nodded slowly. We care about you, Elena, he said. This isn't about excluding you. It's about including you in something real. Elena felt a surge of conflicting emotions, anger, betrayal, but also a strange sense of curiosity. She had always believed love was fluid, but she had never imagined it would challenge her in this way. I don't know, she said finally, her voice trembling. This is a lot. Mark nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. Take your time, he said softly. We're not going anywhere. The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Elena's mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. Part of her wanted to walk away, to leave behind the lies and the betrayal. But another part of her was intrigued, drawn to the possibility of something new and uncharted. She looked at Mark, then at Liam, and for the first time she allowed herself to consider the idea. What would this even look like? She asked, her voice tentative. Mark and Liam exchanged a glance, and then Mark spoke. However you want it to, he said. We're not here to pressure you. We just want to be honest with you, and if you're willing, we'd like to see where this could go. Elena took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of something. Hope, maybe, or curiosity. I need time to think, she said finally. Mark nodded, his expression filled with relief. Take all the time you need, he said softly. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. They talked about their feelings, their fears, their hopes for the future. Elena listened, her mind still reeling, but she found herself drawn to the honesty in their words. By the time the candles had burned low and the wine bottles were empty, she felt a strange sense of calm. She didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was on the brink of something real. As the night wore on, the tension between them began to shift. What had started as a confrontation slowly transformed into something else, a tentative exploration of the boundaries of love and desire. Mark and Liam were careful, always checking in with her, making sure she was comfortable. And Elena, though still unsure, found herself drawn to the vulnerability they shared. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the windows, Elena felt a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in years. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She was ready to find out. The room was bathed in the soft glow of candlelight, the air thick with anticipation. Elena sat between Mark and Liam, her heart pounding as she tried to steady her breathing. The weight of the evening's revelations still hung heavy in the air, but there was a new energy now, a tentative curiosity that pulled her forward. She looked at Mark, his eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear, and then at Liam, whose calm demeanor offered a strange sense of comfort. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for," he said, his voice steady. "This is about us, all of us. We're in this together." Liam nodded, his expression soft but earnest. "We care about you, Elena," he said. "This isn't about pushing you into something. It's about exploring what's possible." Elena took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had spent the past few hours grappling with her emotions, anger, betrayal, but also a strange sense of liberation. The idea of stepping into the unknown terrified her, but it also excited her in a way she hadn't felt in years. "Okay," she said finally, her voice trembling. "But we take this slow. And if at any point I'm not comfortable, we stop." Mark and Liam exchanged a glance, their relief palpable. "Of course," Mark said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Whatever you need." Liam smiled, his eyes warm. "We're here for you, Elena. Always." The tension in the room began to shift, the air charged with a new kind of energy. Mark leaned in, his lips brushing against Elena's in a kiss that was soft but filled with promise. She hesitated for a moment, then kissed him back, her heart racing. When they pulled apart, Liam was watching them, his expression unreadable. "Your turn," Mark said, his voice low. Elena turned to Liam, her stomach fluttering with nerves. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but confident. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice soft. Elena nodded, her breath catching in her throat. "I'm sure," she whispered. Liam leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was slow and deliberate. It was different from Mark's, softer, more tentative, but no less intense. Elena felt a surge of emotion, her mind struggling to process the complexity of what was happening. When they pulled apart, she looked at Mark, who was watching them with a mix of pride and longing. The rest of the night passed in a blur of whispered words and tentative touches. They moved together, their bodies finding a rhythm that felt both familiar and new. Elena felt a sense of connection she hadn't felt in years, not just with Mark, but with Liam as well. It was as if the walls she had built around herself had begun to crumble, leaving her raw and vulnerable but also more alive than she had ever been. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the windows, they lay tangled together, their breathing slow and even. Elena felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years, her mind quiet for the first time in what felt like forever. She looked at Mark, who was watching her with a soft smile, and then at Liam, whose eyes were filled with a quiet contentment. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark reached for her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "We figure it out together," he said. "One step at a time." Liam nodded, his expression soft. "Whatever happens, we're in this together," he said. "All of us." Elena felt a surge of emotion, her heart swelling with a mix of love and gratitude. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face it. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of their presence wash over her, and for the first time in years, she felt truly at peace.